was a time in this country, a long time ago, when reading wasn't just for fags, and neither was writing. People wrote books and movies that had stories, so you cared whose ass it was and why it was farting, and I believe that time can come again.
Hello and welcome to the Think Liberty podcast. This is episode 50, and I'll be your host, another fucking Adam Sandler movie. On this episode, we are going to talk about something that's even confusing my guests a little bit. It's kind of the idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? I think Killian seemed to, before we turned on the record button, Killian seemed to be the only one kind of keyed into it. But this is something that we're going to get into, and it's not necessarily completely political, although it definitely will be relevant to political topics and discourse and stuff like that. So that'll get into it. But it's just kind of this overall idea that, like, you know, people in general just don't like change. They don't like being uncomfortable. But most of the time you'll find that when you force yourself to be a little bit uncomfortable and accept a little bit of change, like some of the best things that happen to you can't happen. So we're going to kind of dive into that kind of stuff. Now, joining me on this episode, we have, again, he's been here now a few times. We're enjoying his company, so we're going to keep having him back. That's editor, writer, and contributor for Being Libertarian, TJ Eckert. TJ, how you doing tonight?
Hey, thanks for having me on board again.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We're glad to have you. Also joining us, another editor and content. I guess it's you guys are both editors now, huh? Right? Killian Hoppe.
Hello.
How you doing? Is that correct? You guys are both editors now, right?
Yeah.
Now, after the merge, we haven't really talked about it on this podcast, but we did have a merge. Maybe we'll touch on it here in a minute after I announce our third guest, host of the Shitlord Preachers podcast, which has also been added to the Think Liberty Network. Hopefully, you have heard him by now, and if you haven't, check out his podcast. It's Amos Joseph. How you doing, Amos?
Doing good.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me tonight, everybody. And let's touch on that for a minute. So, Think Liberty recently got swallowed up by our libertarian overlords at Being Libertarian. As someone that came from the Being Libertarian side, do you feel does it feel overlordy, TJ?
Yeah, we're slowly just absorbing everyone. Next is the LP, so we'll look out for that.
I don't know if I want to. After those midterm, boy, you guys, that's been, I don't know, anyone that's listening, I'm sure you've heard it, but everyone's been having a good time talking about the midterms and the Libertarian Party lately. They really cleaned up, huh?
Yeah, I think once we absorb them, we'll get them to a solid 5% at least.
Yeah, one would hope. What did Larry end up with? Do you guys remember?
I think it was like 1.7% of the vote.
1.6.
Like 70,000. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Oh. That was it. Killian, how do you feel about the midterms and how it went for libertarians?
Well, that assumes that it went. I mean, it came and it went, but
right.
So that was kind of it. I think that it was a great example of futility and strategy, just to kind of put it a little bluntly there. It looked like, well, I think we've covered this on a lot of episodes, how there's a good chunk of people in the LP that have kind of a neckbeardy vibe to them. What was the name of the guy that every single one of his campaign photos was him at a Hooters?
You're fucking
and
weird.
Somehow like we did like fucking nothing about that.
What's it, Dingus? That's the best part. Yeah. His name was Dingus.
Yeah, Dingus the Predator. Vote for me. What the fuck is that? Sometimes voluntary association, the good part about it is that you can turn it down, and I think the LP needs to learn that.
Yeah, for anyone that's not familiar, I think it was Daryl Dingus or something. And look, you know, he very well might be a really nice guy, but was he running for something? Do you guys remember?
Yeah, something in Colorado. He was running for a seat somewhere.
Yeah, so he was actually running for office, and essentially his campaign was going to like Hooters and Vegas and just taking pictures with like the most attractive women he could find in the least amount of clothing. And he just put those pictures all over his Facebook. And that, from as best I can tell, that was the entirety of his campaign. It's really good stuff. You should go check it out if you guys get a chance, if you're listening. It's something else.
Sounds like my kind of guy.
Oh, we're so gonna get laid tonight.
Yeah, he's a guy.
Yeah, I wonder how he did. How he watch. We don't even know. It turns out he won.
No, he can't.
Like, oh man,
he quit. I think.
Oh, okay.
I think he quit. I think like he got a lot of pushback from folks in the LP, and I think he quit. I could be wrong. That would be funny. How funny would it be if he got like the highest percentage? Like of any, you know what's funny is I think James Weeks actually was the one that got the highest percentage of like any libertarian. No, I could be wrong. There could have been someone that
actually
ran.
did have a few libertarians that won their seats, just the local city council levels.
So okay. Well,
there were multiple libertarians elected.
I stand corrected.
That was 16 out of 833.
Yeah,
I think that's the fraction.
1.6%.
Oh gosh, yeah. I just think it's funny. Like you get like, I mean, obviously, like they're running for different offices, you know, so it's a big difference. But it is like there is something funny about the fact that like Larry Sharp got 1.6%, and then James Weeks got like 22%, like running on a platform strictly of like build more strip clubs. So
he spoke to the American people.
Yeah, maybe there's a lesson in that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so getting into this topic, I know it seems it's a broad, I mean, it might seem like a perilous topic, right? But it's getting comfortable with being a little uncomfortable. And it's something that like, okay, so like, you know, we'll bring have any of you guys, have you ever switched jobs before? Like while you're in a job, right? Like you go job hunting for a job while you're actually working.
Yep.
I've actually never worked before, so I wouldn't know.
Right. Okay.
True libertarian right here.
Yeah.
See you guys later. If I still have a job.
Yeah. So it's, you know, that process, the going through that process, it's nerve wracking, right, Killian? Like it's part of you. I mean, you know, you want the job, right? Because you went to go get a job. You were seeking the new job in the first place, but that point where you get accepted to the new job and you have to go quit it's terrifying, right? Like it
can be. It kind of ties into what we're talking about here with the being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like a lot of the time, the only way that you're going to get any kind of traction in life in general, the way that you're going to explore new ideas or the way that you're going to experience any kind of change or growth is by going to areas you haven't been before and doing things you haven't done before. And that includes taking on work. I mean, I'll be a little candid here. When I first came on with TL is a great example. I never did editing. I never did writing and publication. I never did podcasting before. And now, you know, I'm doing the show and I'm doing the managing editor spot for TL and the news editor spot for BL and all the other stuff that I got going on. And it's all new to me, but you just kind of dive in head first, get comfortable with it, and you'd be really surprised with what you can get out of it. And I think that's really the crux of the idea.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, yeah, you know, absolutely it is. And I think it's a good way to start with it. Are you guys starting to pick up what we're putting down now there, TJ and Amos? You guys familiar with this kind of...
Oh, yeah. Oh, I just suddenly, all those jobs I had. I totally forgot about those.
Yeah. Well, it's not just jobs, right? Just this whole idea. And like politically, I think it makes a lot of sense because I think that when people get into politics, right, they figure out this is what I'm going to be. And that's that, right? And I've decided my team and what I am. And I'm not even going to talk about stuff that doesn't align with what I've picked, right? Because it's just not okay. Now, you know, I mean, we've gone over it tons and tons of times here. I consider myself an ANCAT, but I often ask questions and I will engage in conversations. I'll even start conversations that make people constantly ask me like what I am. Because sometimes...
Well, I think that's one of the unique things about being a libertarian is that most of us arrived here by kind of questioning our beliefs until we were uncomfortable with them,
right?
You know, and then we changed them. As I always like what Dave Smith says. You know, all libertarians have OCD, which is obsessive. What does he call it? Consistency disorder, obsessive consistency disorder. Because anytime we have something that just can't work out in our heads logically, we have to just like, even if it takes us to an uncomfortable point, we're like, it's not consistent. It just bugs me. It's a problem.
And I feel like some people do, but I feel like some people don't. And this is fascinating. And maybe I'm wrong, right? Like, okay, so we had Kyle on not too long ago, and I feel like Kyle is a great example of someone that could learn a lot from kind of embracing this concept that we're talking about tonight, right? Like Kyle, he is a brand. You know, you heard him on here. Now, I don't know, like anyone that's listening to this episode that listened to that episode, you know, before that episode, I actually talked to TJ, and I felt really bad when we rolled that episode, because I sat there and told TJ like a couple times, like, hey, you know, don't worry. This is, you know, I know that sometimes people will debate with Kyle. That's like what he's famous for, right? He's got his group ANCAP versus Minarchist, whatever. And I told TJ, this isn't going to be a debate, right? We're just going to have a discussion about the philosophy and this and that. And then Kyle literally, like, it's his brand. He couldn't help himself. And I felt terrible because TJ came on and it just turned into a debate, even though I told him it wasn't going to be one. But
no, I don't. I had a really, you know, he friended me on Facebook afterwards, or I friended him, or
there you go.
It was fun to me. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I had a few drinks, so I wasn't expecting. I was like, hey man, whatever, let's just talk it out.
No, I mean, it's always a good time going through it with Kyle. I just felt bad because I like explicitly said, you know, don't worry, this won't be a debate. And he gets into it. I went and saw him. I used to get into it with Kyle all the time, though. Then I went and saw him face to face at the national convention. And it was great. We hung out and drank some beers. He's a nice guy.
That's how it usually is. Like anytime, you know, you have like this huge beef with someone, you just meet him and you're like, oh, you're actually way cooler than I thought. Or you just, you know, you realize that most of that stuff is just keyboard warrior stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like I said, it's like his brand. And this goes right back to the concept of the topic, right? Like, I don't know. It's weird. And it's hard to put your finger on, but like some people cannot make themselves do it. They can't let themselves question whether or not that thing that they believe could be maybe a little wrong. Right. Like I had a big moment like this when I came to my whole natural rights personal wrestling match that I went through. Right. That lasted like a week for me. It took me to find out where I was going to land with that. And that was tough. It's tough to look at something that you've believed for a long time and think maybe I don't believe in this anymore. Maybe my mind has changed on it. Which is also, Killian, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that when you talk about like changing minds. How many people have you seen in the last, let's just say 5 months, go from being even libertarian to not? Like we saw Matt Kay go from one, like the bottom right corner of the spectrum. What is he, all the way to the top left now, I think?
I mean, probably a little bit past that if we're being realistic, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, he went pretty far. How many
He's like, Stalin did nothing wrong, but he should have. Like he's in that territory.
Yes, it's crazy. It's crazy, and I feel like, you know, maybe those people, maybe there's a balance, right? Because you got those folks that go totally overboard to the point where maybe they're not as solid in their conviction as you think they, or maybe, what word I'm looking for? Like they're not as confident in their convictions, and people start talking to them, and they falter to his side. Like I feel like there's a middle ground there, right? Like when you can have those discussions and you can be kind of like pliable and to the things that you're going to accept and let in, but not so much to the point to where whenever like, so let's talk about mutualism today, and you're like, oh shit, I guess I'm a mutualist. All right.
I think those people are kind of the opposite of us, though, because it's like I feel like libertarians we end up changing our viewpoints based on evidence, right, and kind of going along with it, where someone like Matt Kay is more so changing evidence to meet his viewpoint. You know, he has a preconceived notion and he'll twist the logic and reality to meet that. So he was an ANCOM. Yeah. Isn't that what he is? I don't know.
I think you just kind of nailed it there.
Killian's just making a slight real quick. No, he's already. I'm waiting.
Theft.
Yeah, I'm waiting for him. He's got to hit all 4 corners. So I'm just waiting for him to come. You know, hit back to the right side. Maybe he'll drop back to ANCAP after that. Who knows? Maybe he's lapping the outer perimeter. It might be.
Yeah, once he becomes a landlord, he'll suddenly just be like, you know what? I actually don't think rent is theft anymore.
He's like, this isn't so bad.
Yeah, right.
I don't mind this. So, Killian, let's go with you. Let's do a little round table here. When was the last time you had to kind of push yourself in this way? Can you give us an example of this?
Yeah. I guess a great example with this would be, I think of one that was a little more impactful, because whenever I'm exposed to new information, I'll weigh the information that's there or the idea that's there. I'll see the validity of it, and then I'll compare it against other stuff that I stand for to make sure that there's that level of consistency. Because yes, libertarian OCD in full effect. I'll do that part with it.
Right.
I'd say one of the biggest break points would probably have been, and I mentioned this on the Shitlord Preachers with Amos there. I think Monday last week. Was the thing with IP law. That was one that was such a barrier for me to wrap my head around, how you could have all of these things being created and research development done and all these other stuff that, like, all these things that go with it, and just wipe that away. Just get rid of that entire concept. But then, that was kind of like an uncomfortable place, because I'm like, well, I don't want there to be a state, but I still support this kind of law. But then there has to be this and there has to be that. And it turned into a whole back and forth, where at the end of it, I finally hit the solid point of, okay, I got to ditch this. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And it doesn't fit in with everything else. So that was quite a lengthy little wrestling match I had with that idea, I'd say.
Yeah. And that's funny, is it does end up being like a bit of a struggle, right? It's never like a light switch that goes on. You always have to like reconcile it. It takes a couple days. You have to like come to terms with what you are now. Yeah. How about you, Amos? Do you have
I become
right? Right. Do you have a situation like this that you can remember in recent memory?
With, you mean just with like becoming kind of wrestling with different ideas? I mean, the big
being challenged, right? Like, yeah, essentially, yeah.
So I guess it plays into kind of the big moment where I really was becoming a libertarian, is where my friend Brooke Potter, who is the co-host of Shitlord Preachers, actually kind of set me on that path of coming to terms with not just like believing, being a libertarian just because, he was talking to me about, taxation being theft and all this stuff, but even like to really think through like some of these things, because believe it or not, a few months before the election, I actually thought Bernie Sanders looked like an okay guy. And here we are on the other side, and I might as well be an ANCAP at this point.
Right. And Bernie Sanders is like the arch nemesis of libertarians. Right? You couldn't have come further from where you were not too long ago.
I mean, and I wasn't even like, maybe politically I wouldn't have lined up with him. I just thought he seemed like a reasonable guy, and I wasn't really thinking deeply in the politics and such. So
that's fascinating. What how did that process go for you? So that's not that long ago at all. It's like 2 years ago or so. How long did that take? I mean, how long did it take you to get into this? And was it like gradual, or how did that go?
I mean, I pretty much would have, like, I was at most would be like somewhat of an SJW sort of sympathizer, like just listening to the news, seeing stuff, kind of playing into the reactionary narrative of just like, sort of how leftism is making sense, socialism, communism. Even
Orange Man bad.
Religious, not even Orange Man bad, actually. I didn't really even care about him. I just was kind of coming from an angle like from this cancerous angle of what's known as progressive Christianity, which is basically leftism plus Jesus equals good. And that's
that guy's
really
the Deion Sanders of retards.
Exactly. Where you start to kind of think, oh, because Jesus would have totally been a communist, therefore it makes sense. And, this guy over here, this crazy old guy with the glasses and the wavy fingers, he's totally going to give me free schooling and free this and free that. It's all going to be great. And then you learn a little economics. You learn a little how ethically that government is doing what it's doing. And you kind of go, oh.
So was it Brooke?
Yeah.
Was it Brooke that open your eyes to all that? Was he the one that kind of, because you said before you guys were both preachers, right? So I assume
right
when you met him,
and you
weren't yet a libertarian.
No, I mean, at most I was like kind of actually started more as sort of the typical conservative Christian kind of type, but that was purely as following in the steps of my parents. It wasn't really my own thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then going into the ministry path, I really didn't care much for politics. And then coming out of it, I was kind of mismatching a few theology with ideology, and kind of thought it made sense that, well, Jesus would be a communist. But then I didn't realize that being a gracious and compassionate person doesn't necessarily mean you need state force to back it.
Right.
You can be a good person. You don't need the state to do that.
Right.
And Jesus being a communist makes no sense. Jesus, if anything, would be just a very, someone who's for charity and such, as a libertarian, if anything.
Which is, okay, so what a fascinating question. And this is interesting. Maybe we'll pivot over to TJ here real quick. And before I ask you the question of the last challenge, I'm kind of curious. I want to stay in this for a minute. Why is it that people naturally, by default, tend to think that taking things from people against their will is the naturally good default position?
Usually people go by it's the ends justify the means sort of thing.
Right.
Like, yeah, I get it. So some people don't need, are losing money against their will, but they have enough money to survive, where these other people that are receiving it are poor. So it's not, if you're asking me how to justify it, like, I don't believe in that. So it's hard to justify, but that's just how it seems, is I always get them to break it down to the ends justify the means, where, yeah, but
so it's essentially like
make everyone better off.
So it's like the greater good argument.
Yeah. That's one that gets thrown around a lot. It's the greater good, it's for the good of society, and
yeah,
and then it just snowballs into all that stuff. Well, you consented by being here, and why don't you just move to Somalia? So
yeah, it's all. I don't know. I just Amos brought that up, and it just kind of struck me as interesting. And it's like, why is that? How come that is the case? Killian, do you have any insight on that?
Well, generally people are okay with it because they don't view it the same way that we do. Like when they see the concepts of like taxation and things like that, they don't see it as a theft. They don't see it as something negative to begin with. So they're just working towards trying to find the most positive way of implementing it, in which case their approach is the most positive way of implementing this system of taxation is to spend it on schools for education, spend it on healthcare, spend it on, helping out the poor and raising their lot in life, because, things aren't easy for people. So if we're going to bother having a government, it should be there to help make things easier for people. A lot of it does end up boiling back to those greater good arguments once you really challenge them on the mechanics of something like taxation, and you showcase that it's effectively an extortion racket. But from the get-go, people don't really have the mentality that taxation is a bad thing. And I think that that's really something that on the libertarian side, we have to understand that that's where people are coming from too.
We are taught from a young age that, the first time you learn about taxes in school, I mean, even public or private schools, it's usually accompanied by this is how we have roads and police and military and emergency services. So we wouldn't have it without it. And you get that embedded in your head from such a young and impressionable age.
It's your civic duty.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Make sure you vote. It's your civic duty. People died for that. Right.
Right. Like when I got this job I started, I remember they're talking, they're like, when you guys, if you get jury duty, we'll give you all the time you need to go do your, we're into people doing their civic duty. I don't know about you guys. Have you ever responded to one of those? Maybe I shouldn't say this on the podcast.
You responded to jury duty or?
Yeah.
No, I'm like the one person that keeps praying that he gets picked for jury duty, and it never happens.
Oh, really?
Damn it. Yeah, everyone complains about it. I'm like, I've never done it, and my wife's been picked, and it's like, why can't this be me? I want to go nullify some shit.
Just to get in there, be the guy that makes everything like back up or what?
Oh yeah. Oh god, that would I'd be so happy.
You're talking about jury nullification?
Yes.
Literally the one thing that can almost get you arrested.
Yeah, live a little, right? You gotta live a little. This is crazy anarchists, right? According to Kyle,
You can do whatever you want. You can shoot somebody in the face because they looked at you funny.
right? That's
Yeah, right. It's a bit of a straw man. There's a little difference there between shooting someone in the face because they look at you and me saying, "Hey, I don't think this guy should go to jail for going to plan." I don't know.
Right.
Sounds crazy.
And then there's Kyle. I do love I got his like the most anarchist. You can do whatever you want. You can just shoot someone in the face. No one cares.
Right?
Perfect.
I told him my neighbor's just going to stab me in the fucking face just because I'm annoying him from across the street, I guess.
That is a funny part of his argument. I always wondered about that. Like I'd get into debates with Kyle and he'd be like, okay, so what if someone came to your house? And I'd be like, well, Kyle, then you defend your house, right? Like that's what makes sense. He's like, well, that's what cops are for. I was like, if someone's breaking into your house and you call the cops aren't going to save that situation for you. You are going to save it for yourself. If they get in, right? If they don't get in, you're fine. And your locks and defenses do what they're supposed to do. But if they get in and you're not armed, right? That's a worse situation than if they get in and you are armed.
Not to hash this out again, but I think he took for granted a lot of things that he just assumes to be true without really justifying them. So, you could say people are outraged online. People, you go, oh my God, look how many people are pissed off that people smoke weed. And it's like, yeah, but that's really easy. It's easy to be upset about politics, especially with technology nowadays. How easy I could sit here and bitch about what's going on in the world from the comfort of my couch. But when the rubber meets the road, if you think all those same people that are complaining online are going to actually take the time to get off the couch, go over to your neighbor's house, bust down the door, risk their life for this policy, you're kidding yourself. So.
Right. Well, and that's the part of his argument, though, is he's like, well, what if you stop that person? What if he goes and gets two of his friends? I'm like, that doesn't happen. People are not sending armies. Tell him, like, no, man, I'd rather just sit at home and get baked or something. Like, it's
right. Think about it, though, right? Think about it. Without the cops, though, if you didn't have police, who's going to show up at your house 40 minutes after it happens and shoot your dog?
That's true.
We need,
I guess there'd be a
service in society.
Yeah, there'll be a private company.
Right. These dogs aren't going to shoot themselves.
Okay. I mean, who's going to accuse your money of committing a crime and seize it?
That's right.
Yeah, right.
That's absolutely right. Okay, let's get back on track here. TJ, what if you can remember one? You could choose to pass if you'd like, but do you remember?
No, I have two.
Okay, yeah.
I have one that sticks out in my mind because it was the most difficult for me, and then I have one that I'm actually kind of dealing with right now.
Okay, let's
maybe
hear
you guys can help me out with.
Sure.
So, my family's real big into helping animals. My mom runs a local dog shelter. We like to rescue dogs. And it was really hard for me. Someone brought up that technically, thinking about it, and I'm going to alienate your entire audience right here, that dogfighting is something that should be made legal if we really wanted to combat it effectively.
Let's hear the argument.
That really took me a while to kind of square that circle where it was like, no, because your immediate reaction is like, no way, that shit's the worst thing in the world. I hate those people. They should all die.
Right. Like, so what's the argument for it?
From a fighting ring, and it's like, no way. But then you start thinking about it, you're like, well, actually, and like that one took me a long time to kind of like, especially when I just tell someone that, I'm like, actually, we should legalize dogfighting, and they're like, wait, what?
So I'm like, unpack that a little for me.
It's just like any other prohibition. When you right now with it being illegal, you get the worst people, the most violent people that are going to be the ones doing it. So, and when you kind of legalize it, it's the same thing. You allow alternatives. People don't want to see dogs fighting. When there's alternatives to being there, you know what I mean? People will seek that stuff out. If it's just like with drugs, if I could choose to buy my drugs from somebody that wasn't worried about shooting me in the face or, having to go into some terrible neighborhood, I would immediately do that as soon as I possibly could. Right.
Or buy drugs that weren't made in a bathtub.
Exactly. And it's the same thing. Like, yeah, these people have, there's gambling addictions, or they're just looking for a way to make money cheap, from the money it brings in. And it's like, if you had alternatives, you made it legal, people would seek that out. And the other aspect is you can't just assume that dogfighting, just because it's illegal, is properly enforced. We still have it. It's still a thing. I don't believe the cops enforce it very well, those laws. So it's like, it's really just a law that makes you feel good. Like, we passed this law, and so dogfighting can't exist anymore. And then you're like, well, it still does, though. And you're like, oh,
it's kind of like
evaluate that.
It's kind of like when they talk about, and this is a tricky one to talk about with people too. It's also like really difficult most of the time is when they talk about like firearms being kept away from people that are quote unquote mentally unstable. It's kind of like the same thing you mentioned there when you talk about like enforcement and how it's done. Is I think on the surface, it's such a hard thing to get people to disagree with, right? Because it's like, from their standpoint, they're like, why would you want to let a crazy person have a gun? And then,
right. And that just misses the whole point in general. Like, that's not the question you should be asking.
It's exactly right. Yeah.
So yeah, that one. But the other one that I was going to say that I'm working out with right now is, and it's it's going to be Veterans Day here shortly, tomorrow, a couple hours, for me at least. I don't like the marketing ideas that some libertarians take, where they try to say that troops are murderers and all this stuff. I tend to reject that, even though I'm vehemently anti-war. But every so often, I just look at some of the terrible things being done, and the argument sticks with me, where I'm like, man, really though, like if they just ignored orders, like things might get better. Like maybe they are complicit. I'm like, no. Like that's terrible marketing. Like, no, they're not the ones pulling the strings. These guys sign up they don't sign up to do these things. But then, it's just one of these things that I just struggle back and forth with, where I'm like, okay.
It's tough. I mean, I'm right there with you. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on the troubles in marketing. Look, maybe this makes me fake. I don't know. I just don't necessarily think because I think it, I should say it. I think there's a fair amount of stuff that I believe in that the world doesn't need to hear about to learn about libertarianism, right? Like, not everyone needs to be an ANCAP. Not everyone has to be at the same level that like we're at, right? I believe you can break people in early and you can let them know some of the base stuff, right? Like Amos, what's the kind of stuff that got you into it when you were still like, hey, Bernie's not so bad? Like, what were some of the conversations that got you into it? Like and
into libertarianism?
Yeah, and also like follow up. What's your take on what TJ was talking about, like with as far as like the troops go?
I only really see the military as a means for defense, and to try to justify defense as going in other countries, playing just for the sake of the conversation, playing God, so to speak, because we're the world power and we got to take care of things. That's a bit iffy for me. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw John Stossel was on Ben Shapiro today, and they talked about that, like the libertarian stance on, what the military plays in other countries.
No, I was planning on listening to that, though. Definitely seems like it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I like how Stossel kind of doesn't really get too deep into it, because most libertarians, from what I hear, don't. I try to stay away from like deep foreign policy discussions on that. I just think defend here. That's about it, and don't get too involved with the world. So, yeah. What was the other question?
No, that's fair. I was just kind of asking, like, because it was like a two-part kind of statement from TJ, right? Like had mentioned, I'll summarize, like he kind of talked about like libertarians sometimes, like maybe they're getting it wrong with marketing. And I think he was, and please keep me honest, TJ, and the troops was kind of an example of that.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with what you said, but it's true. Like, when I became a libertarian, if someone had started off, the first thing they said to me about libertarianism was like what I said earlier. It's like, hey, just so you know, like dogfighting should be made legal. I probably wouldn't be a libertarian today. Like if that's how Murray Rothbard led his libertarian manifesto, I'd be like, yeah, probably not for me.
Yeah, that's true. They're like, how many horrible, there's a guy, Killian, you're as familiar with him as anybody is. And he talks about the least popular thing in the world to talk about when it comes to being a libertarian. That's age of consent laws. Right? Like whenever any libertarian brings up age of consent laws, like it doesn't matter what your position on them is. You're just like, why?
Yeah, Murray Rothbard wrote, 70,000 essays, and everybody seems to know that one passage from Ethics of Liberty. Everybody.
Yeah, well, it's the one that it sticks on. It's like, what's her name? Mary Ruwart, right? Did I say her name right?
Yes, yeah,
She's
Ruwart.
incredible. She is a genius.
I love her,
Absolutely
by the way,
brilliant.
yes.
Yeah, everything she writes is amazing. She is one of these people. If anyone listening, if you're not familiar with Ruwart, I don't know if I'm saying her name. Ruwart. She's on Twitter. She's on Facebook and all this stuff. No one is better at crafting like a couple sentences that'll just like totally make you change your worldview than Mary is. She's really, really, really good. She wrote in a book, like, what was it? Was it a whole chapter? How much ink did she dedicate to this topic in that book?
It wasn't as much as people think.
Maybe a paragraph, right? Like it wasn't a lot.
Yeah, it might have been maybe a couple paragraphs. It was less than a page.
Yeah, but if you Google her, that's the first thing you see.
The quotes on there about children being able to consent to things. So, yeah,
right. And so I think that's a perfectly good example of your point, TJ. Like, maybe don't bring that stuff up. Right. Maybe if you're going to be and look, Mary's great. Like I said, I give her all the praise in the world because she's brilliant. But I'm sure if she could go back in time, maybe she'd have left that part out of the book. Maybe she wouldn't.
It needs those small, things that in the libertarian movement, the nuances that we have, they do need to be worked out eventually. They have to be hashed out. It's just you don't want to start with that.
You don't want it on the first page of Google.
It goes at what's that?
I said you don't want it on the first page of Google,
Yes, yeah, exactly. Maybe you have to work a little bit to find those. You have to show a little bit of interest in it. Yeah. But no, it goes further because it's not even that I believe something when it comes to the military, and I'm just not saying it. It's that as we were talking about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, I still have this inner battle with myself in my own head where I'm like, man, do I believe this or do I not? I go back and forth on it still. So I haven't even worked it out in my own head, let alone, do I lead when I'm trying to sell someone on libertarianism with that?
And this is a good point, and I kind of want to talk about this, but this gets a lot of flack too, and it's Rothbard's his market for children. And I feel like this sounds worse than it is, right? It's really just like a free market adoption agency, but people treat this thing like it's the worst. It's the worst in the world.
Well, yeah, they spin it with everything. I mean, that's how we say taxation is theft, and they spin it to be like, oh, well, you guys just don't like roads. You just want it to be chaos. It's like, yeah, Murray Rothbard talked about adoption and there actually being a market for children for people that can't have children. People are like, oh, so you just want to sell kids into slavery? It's like, oh, that's not what he said at all.
Right. Like out of all
it gets
stuff,
to the point where it's comical. It's how can you take someone who's so adamantly against force and just think that that's what he's advocating for? Really? That's what you got? Yeah.
Look, there's a lot of stuff that Murray wrote about that you could point to and be like, hey, what's up with that, Murray? I don't think that's one of the ones that warrants that just personally.
Somebody get some slides because we're about to project all that shit.
All right. How about you, Killian? What before we move on from this whole topic of marketing, and maybe we won't. I could talk about that. This is the one thing that I could stick on forever, and I feel like every time we talk about Arvin Vohra has to come up at some point. But Killian, how about you?
I'd probably say one of the a great example of this, and I know this is going to get you moving a little bit here, but people in the libertarian circles' reaction to Hayek, just because of his Chicago school stances.
Yeah, well,
those ones are.
You mean the fact that he's a socialist? Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I could feel the shade that just came across the entire podcast when you said that.
So up your asses.
Yeah. Man, that one hurts. No, it's true. I feel like Hoppe has done a lot of damage to Hayek, to be completely honest with you. If you read Hayek by himself, I mean, look, none of these dudes are perfect, right? So look at Milton Friedman. He is generally loved by all, right? I feel like I don't often see a lot of hate on Friedman. Tons of hate all the time on Hayek, right? Hayek is a lot more libertarian than Friedman is when you break it just down to the principles. Now, granted, there is some stuff that obviously, Hayek, there's a whole bunch of stuff that, in my opinion, Hayek got wrong. In the Constitution of Liberty, he was talking about well, I might be able to support the draft, right? Which is terrible. It's absolutely horrible. But he had some other stuff that's really good. He even had, you know what? So this might be good. We can parlay into this. So sticking on Rothbard and on Hayek, right? So Rothbard, I don't know if you guys remember, like Rothbard said, like everybody has one thing, right? And so everyone has their one thing.
Yes, their one deviation.
Right, their one deviation. And when we talk about Hayek, and I don't mean to leave that one. Look, if anyone's listening, I'll link it in the show notes. I have a whole article that I wrote about Hoppe and how he attacks Hayek and how I don't think it's necessarily called for. And I'll link that in the show notes. You can go read it. We don't need to go dive down that rabbit hole right now. But the one deviation. So let's discuss this. Let's talk about the one thing. And for me, and I'll start. It goes along with Hayek, and Hayek for the most part was like really. He was totally into like a totally free and open market, and if there was going to be protection and laws in the market, they would serve the purpose of protecting the consumer. And I always kind of sympathize with that, and I think that's safe to say it's probably like my one deviation. It's the one thing, like if we're talking about, you know, peeling everything back and what are we going to leave until the very least, maybe like defense to some level and consumer protection would probably be mine. Who wants to go next?
I could actually get on board with your consumer protection. I actually would disagree with defense, though. I wouldn't want to. I think that's one of the first things that needs to be privatized. That's my problem with minarchists, is that they want to keep defense and courts and all that stuff. And it's like, man, those are the first things to go for me. But I could probably get on board with, if we're talking about on the road to anarchy, you know, consumer protection doesn't seem like it's a bad deviation to have.
No, I feel the same way, right? Like what it's like worse things could happen. The defense thing just kind of, maybe it's just like a level of paranoia. It's a lot of the stuff I read in the history of societies that were like pro-liberty. Their biggest issues are always that they neglected the defense aspect. Just so many of these societies that existed that were pro-liberty, and all of them, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them all have the same issue of neglecting defense in one way or another. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that it's going to take a state-funded military, and perhaps I haven't read enough literature to give me the confidence that I would need to be able to make a good argument for how that could be done properly. But it's not as if I advocate the state to do it. It's just something that I'm always fearful of, because I think it's something that gets overlooked a lot in libertarian philosophy.
I guess, but if you look back on a lot of the historical examples, they all got conquered by states that conquered a bunch of other states too. So it's not like had they have had a state defense helping them, or like, you know, set up some type of apparatus that way, right, like chances are they would have been conquered anyways, because it's like, it's not like this anarchy state was the only one that got conquered by this state, and then everyone else was able to like fend off this invading nation. Like usually it was by a country that invaded a bunch of other countries too. So if that makes sense. No, it
totally makes sense. I mean, either way, so that just seems like it's an issue that needs to be solved for state militaries and those that prefer non-state militaries as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, okay, so we could have a state, but doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to solve the issue. It's like, you know, we could have gun control, but is that actually going to be effective at stopping someone from mass shooting? It's like, yeah, right, we could have a state defense, but would it have actually done anything to fend off that invading nation? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good argument. That makes a lot of sense. How about you guys, Amos and Killian?
I was actually going to say that actually ties really well into the idea of being, you know, comfortable with being uncomfortable, is talking about things like school shootings, talking about the possibility of a country being conquered or different things like that, and being able to explore those ideas. I think that really ties into kind of the theme of theme that we led in with here, that, yeah, you know, we need to be able to discuss these ideas and go through these side topics, as well as like understand these kind of deviations that come up, like was mentioned earlier. I think that getting like back to the core topic, if you will, I think that one thing that we can really do with ideas like this is explore them, because I find that going back way back to the first like 3 minutes of the episode, one of the biggest things that people do is close themselves off in their little tribes of ideas. They enter their little echo chambers, and you'll see a small amount of deviation in those echo chambers. Like you see capitalist Democrats versus socialist Democrats. You see just the entire divide all the way from anarchist to classical liberal inside of libertarianism. you see these kinds of separations that come up. But I find that, and I'm a big guy on argumentation and discussion is kind of like my bread and butter when I'm going through these things. I find that people's drive to stay in those circles, to stay entrenched in those ideas, is probably one of the most damaging things to actually being able to come to answers with these ideas.
TJ, did you just share mine, or do you have one other than that?
I guess this is going to sound awful, but yeah, I don't actually have a deviation, being the best ANCAP there is, It's
yeah.
No, I never really I try to think I don't, just because if I do find a deviation, it's really it's like having that thorn in your back. Like it would just bug me to the point where I worked it out. It's hard to think of one that I'm sure I had one. If we talked about enough topics, we'd eventually uncover one. But right now I'm drawing a blank on where I actually would, especially in regards to like where I might want the state to hang around, because I don't want the state hanging around at all. So I'm not really sure, honestly.
Okay. That's fair. Not TJ's too pure for.
Plus, I'm trying to steal Dave Smith's most consistent motherfucker title. So can't admit that on the.
That's
on the
fair.
Air,
That's fair. Okay, Amos, how about you, buddy? Do you have one?
I mean, in my conversations that I've had with, I do talk to a lot of people. Like, talking to other statists, I'd probably say somewhere. I really wonder if, as much as I've talked to people about private charity and all this stuff, and I really wonder how many people are truly generous given no taxation, and it just bugs me, just kind of like what you were saying, TJ, with that little thorn, just. What do you do about the poor people? I mean,
yeah, it's tough. That's a hard one for people to rationalize too, especially being on the outside of libertarianism. Is that without having to, we say things like, the market provides and all that stuff, and we could actually go into details on how it would, but most people, without actually having really concrete evidence, it's hard to get them to convince them out of it. You could say, well, actually, without all this money going to administrative overhead, that's money that we'd spend actually giving it back to the poor. And people are like, yeah,
exactly.
But they wouldn't. And you're like, well, but they would. And, it's how do you move them out of that? It's tough. That's one of the toughest ones I could think of.
The concern that I also got with, arguing the ANCAP position is they tend to wonder, for example, I think one thing was, what is it, rural electrical grids, running electricity out to the countryside. That was kind of a government move, and people questioned me on that. And I said, well, I think if you started from scratch in an ANCAP society, you wouldn't really have rural areas because it wouldn't be economically sound to live in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, people naturally congregate together. I think that's kind of a played out argument, though. I've heard that too, where people go, well, with when net neutrality was big, everyone was like, well, it needs to be government involved because they're the ones that ran all the lines, and without government actually doing that, we wouldn't have it in the first place. All the infrastructure that was laid. And
right.
I don't agree with that. That's I like how Tom Woods always says, if there was a Sears sitting here in a field and there was a random gas station somewhere else, you'd have all these people just standing around scratching their heads like, man, I wonder how we connect these two, geez, because without government, we just can't have roads.
Yeah, just absolutely lost.
Sort that out. It's like saying a shopping mall that without government, we wouldn't have escalators to go up, to and from the stores, because the stores would just be sitting there and they're like, oh yeah, we have no incentive to actually find a way to get people in our stores.
Right. No way to get anything done. Man, you can't steal anything from anybody, and humanity just comes to a grinding halt.
Yeah, because people are just going to shoot you in the face for looking at them wrong.
Right. Hey,
you can do whatever you want. You can shoot somebody in the face because they looked at you funny.
So yeah, I mean, the only deviation, the closest thing I guess I would have for deviation is kind of, I guess the dirty word welfare. I mean, even if we took like the technically it'd be a minarchist approach at that point, you would just have absolute bare minimum, like, okay, we got to cover we just got, just enough money to keep people alive, surviving, not like the way we have it now where people are literally banking on having kids to get a bigger check from the government.
Yeah, see, but now you just cross the line into racism, man. What's up with that? Everyone always
white people do it too.
You can't talk about welfare and all that stuff without just automatically being labeled some like totally crazy thing. Like, I swear.
See, you're the one that called me a racist, so
I was just
brought it up.
What is that like?
Anytime I talk about something controversial related to welfare, like I get labeled like some name that has nothing to do with like welfare or whatever, and I'm like, oh,
what's that? All right. Is that the he who smelt it dealt it defense?
Yeah, I guess.
Hey, my 23andMe says I'm like 0.2% black, so I'm offended.
Dude, you're more black than Elizabeth Warren is Native American.
Exactly.
Congratulations. Was that a dog whistle? I can never tell. That's tough.
Oh God, don't even get me started on dog whistling.
That's the worst thing. I like dog whistling is terrible because if like someone wants to beat that drum and do the whole everything is racist thing, like everything is just a dog whistle. That's just what it becomes, right? Like everything.
The whole point of a dog whistle is that all these people that are supposedly hearing these dog whistles and calling it out, they're the ones that aren't supposed to be hearing it in the first place. It's like someone, hey man, that's a dog whistle for Nazism. And I'm like, if it is, why are you the only one that hears it?
Right. That's a great point.
Like, what? Everyone that you think is a Nazi isn't hearing it, but yet you're hearing it. So are you a Nazi? Like what it doesn't make any sense. It is the dumbest argument I could think of. When someone brings up dog whistling, I just immediately check out. I'm like, nope, nothing good's going to come out of this.
Right. Yeah. I'm not listening. Yeah. I guess it would be more relevant if it wasn't used like it was, but it's just like pretty much whenever anyone gets backed into a corner. Yeah. I mean, look, it's beating the drum. Everyone's talked about this all the time. It's whenever people start talking about that's racist, it's a dog whistle. That's oftentimes it's when people don't have anything left to defend, right? Like you got them into a corner and they're just going to go there to try and salvage the argument.
It's sad because it's like, plus it just makes no sense. Dave Smith was talking about it. I know he's got
a great podcast.
Yeah, and he was mentioning about it. It was like, when in history have racists come to power or like started groups and just been like beating around the bush? Like no one, you had these KKK members that had these rallies. They weren't like, hey, I'm just saying that some people got to go, not pointing any fingers at it. Like, no, they don't. Nobody does that. It's like, that's not how that works. Like, so to just sit there and be like, yeah, well, we'll just fall back on the dog whistle. Yeah, you're not openly racist, but you're just dog whistling. It's like, so I don't know. I just get worked up even thinking about it.
No, it's true. And it's this like funny idea that like under every rock is a hidden racist that's just waiting. And for some reason they're completely the opposite of how a lot of racists often are, which they wear it on their sleeve, right? These are the secret racists. They're hiding.
It's like when you think about what it's being thrown at, it's just insane. It's like, oh, especially towards libertarians, where it's like, oh, libertarians are dog whistling to racists and white nationalists. It's like Nazis and made them so that now they don't believe in aggression anymore. We're awful. What?
Right. Yeah. I don't know. So, okay, this has been decent. Is there anything else that you guys want to go over before we get out of here? As far as this topic goes, I think Killian may have stepped away here. Is he back yet?
No, I think he's back. But no, I mean, it's just if people can take one thing away, I'd say that being comfortable in being uncomfortable is something you should kind of strive for, in my opinion. It's how you uncover the truth in most situations. If you always run away from situations that make you uncomfortable, I feel like you're going to find yourself uncomfortable more often than not if you just turn and face it and try to, get to the bottom of stuff.
That's absolutely right. And, even for you libertarians listening, right? Like, it's not just about getting to libertarianism and then like you found it and you have it figured out and that's all there is to it. Like, challenge yourself more, right? Like, I may have used this metaphor before on the show, but like people are like rubber bands, and there's absolutely a point to where you can stretch the rubber band too far and it'll snap that rubber band. But what you'll often find is that rubber bands can actually be stretched pretty far. And the more you stretch it, the better it's going to be. It's going to be able to be flexible, right? If you just leave it there and you never stretch the rubber band, it's going to get really used to that shape that it's in. It's going to get stiff and it's going to break easier, right? But the more that you stretch it, the more flexible it becomes. And people are a lot like that, so when you're pushing your limits and you're challenging yourself more, it's keeping you more flexible. And it's keeping you on your toes, and it's a good thing to do. And it's keeping you fresh, and it's keeping you from getting into these points where you're just kind of stuck, right, in that lane or that echo chamber. And it's letting you explore different things and come to different conclusions. And maybe you don't come to different conclusions, but at least you considered a different opinion. And, that can go a long way into making you even more confident in the opinion that you had before.
Yeah, and one of the things libertarians need to think about, particularly, it's hard for libertarians versus people that are, in the mainstream. So because the mainstream, it's very easy to get caught in an echo chamber, because every late night comedy show is going to reinforce your into the opposite problem, where they find libertarianism and then they're like, well, I found this truth, so now that's it. Like, I'm just right on everything. It's like, no, you should be constantly questioning your views and rethinking them and working them out.
Right. The sword hath been removed from the stone. My job is done here.
Yeah. Right. We're not done. Like it's just because we think we're right, which I obviously wholeheartedly do believe that we are in the right. It doesn't mean that we just like, all right, well, now we'll just stop. We're good.
Right. Right.
That's a flaw I think a lot of libertarians make.
No, it's big time, right? It's the you get there and you go through all the trouble it took to get here, and then you stop. I've seen it happen to a lot of people. You bring up an idea that some libertarians don't like, and they all of a sudden turn into like, that same kind of SJW trait where it's like if a topic comes up that they don't like, they just kind of turn on you, and they just get like sour with you and super angry. It's like, oh, this isn't fun.
Yeah, and the other thing I've seen, we've probably all seen this, that people will come to libertarianism and then they won't question their views enough to actually understand the underlying issue. And then they'll end up just kind of like snapping back. And how many times have you heard someone be like, yeah, I used to be libertarian, but they're crazy. Like they're stupid. Their ideas are this or that. And it's like, anytime you kind of dig at that, they always end up uncovering some like flawed logic where they either like didn't do their due diligence, or they just misunderstood something and just didn't care to really go any further.
Like, you can do whatever you want. You can shoot somebody in the face because they looked at you funny.
I don't know what you're talking about, TJ.
Yeah, right. I used to be an anarcho-capitalist. I had all those things, but I'm just not. It's like, man, it's
you're the world's worst ANCAP then. That's the case.
But you hear that a lot, though. I hear tons of like conservatives that are like, "Oh, dude, I used to be libertarian, but you guys are just, you can't have a military or you can't not have a military because then you'll just get overrun by the Chinese." And you're like, really? Have you read anything like about what Bob Murphy says about this, or David Friedman or anything? Well, no, I didn't. They're crackpots.
Right.
Oh, okay.
That's always a good one. Like, I used to be an ANCAP, but I gave up on it because it was so silly. By the way, who's going to build the roads? And it's like, I'd like to know what kind of ANCAP you were. I'm a little curious about.
Yeah.
The
world's worst ANCAP is putting it mildly.
Right. Yeah. Killian, is there anything that you'd like to go over before we got out of here, buddy?
I guess something kind of on the topic here. I mentioned this on one of my earlier podcast episodes. When it comes to like getting out of your shell and going and doing something a little bit different, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, as it were. One thing that I do, and I've done it for a number of years, and I definitely recommend it for other people, is every month I pick up something that I know that I either have no knowledge on or something that I know that I suck at. And I make a point that month of doing what I can on improving it. So like back in September, I focused on fitness. In October, I focused on digital marketing after you made some suggestions to look into how all that stuff works. So
how'd you like
that,
focus
on that. I just kind of do something like that every single month. And for anyone out there that's listening, I definitely recommend trying it out. Just trying something completely different each month just to kind of break out of that shell, and you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how it changes your worldview on looking at new ideas and looking at new concepts. if you're constantly in that kind of self-imposed state of flux.
Yeah. You know, that, and like the next time someone talks to you about something that you like, look, you know your own mind, you know your own headspace, right? The next time someone talks to you about something, to anyone listening, and it's something that you immediately have an adverse reaction to, like they start talking about it and you immediately like, ew, I don't like that. Stop yourself from doing that and ask for clarification. Ask them to tell you more, right? It's too often that people poo-poo shit before they completely understand where someone's coming from. Now, yes, there is plenty of times where someone's going to get into something like, right, if someone, what about the roads, right? Clearly, okay, you've heard it before, you know all that one, right? But like, you don't try to give it some patience, try to hear people out and understand what they're saying. And you know, maybe the worst thing you could do is learn a little something more about something that you weren't as familiar with before. Amos, do you have anything before we get out of here, buddy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Basically, I mean, one thing I kind of realized as I've, if you want to call it the red pilling, sort of, you know, people breaking out of their normal molds and thinking differently, you know, being comfortable with uncomfortably questioning themselves and being questioned by others. I always kind of see it like it's important to sort of, I guess, establish sort of a mindset, if you want to call it a mental framework, firmware of constantly being comfortable with having your ideas questioned. I don't know if you guys saw the meme where one of the AJ Plus contributors, basically, she talked about how socialism was like a bad souffle.
No. Yeah.
And
just because it falls down doesn't mean you should stop making souffles. We posted
that on Being Libertarian.
Yeah.
Yeah. The bad souffle. So I couldn't help but think it kind of ties in. But imagine, you know, you have a lot of these hardline, you know, liberals or conservatives or just people who are stuck in their mindsets, and they're enjoying the souffle that they've made, and they're not really they don't want to make it any better, and they don't think it can get any worse, and or in, you know, the oven, the materials, the ingredients are just sitting there going stale. They don't get anything new. And I think it's important that we always make better souffles. You have that mindset where you're constantly tinkering with making your better souffle. And hopefully you don't kill 100 million people in the last century with your souffle.
So basically what you're saying is socialism could still work.
Yeah, actually,
exactly what I'm saying. That is my deviation, by the way, is socialism.
Is full-blown socialism.
Deviation to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And here's how Bernie's going to win.
Right.
Amos. Yeah, actually, I have the quote right here, the tweet that she posted, and it's actually worse than I remember. Looking back on it,
the souffle one.
Yeah, do you want me to read it real quick?
Yeah.
It says, "Think of socialism like a fancy baked good. Just because many have made a mess of their kitchen attempting it, doesn't mean you go around declaring you'll never eat souffle again. It just means you try harder." Which is a weird way to laugh off like the hundreds of millions of people that have died trying to make.
You are fake news.
Yeah,
that was we posted a clapback on that, and I said the only accurate part of this tweet is the fact that socialist economies collapse easier than souffles.
That's good. I love that. So if anyone listening who's not familiar, go check out Being Libertarian, and also TJ Swift. What's your Twitter handle, TJ?
It is @EckertTJ.
Yeah, go check. He's famous for his clapbacks there on Twitter. They get posted by Being Libertarian quite a bit, and they're quite delightful. I like them.
Yeah, that is an awful way to look at it, though. That souffle thing. I'm glad you brought that up, man.
Yeah, it's a pretty bad take.
Thinking that we just keep trying socialism over and over again, just like you keep trying to make a souffle in your kitchen. Holy crap! That is, I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around.
You know, Imagine your ideas is like the souffle. You just got to keep making a better souffle, or at least a souffle that you can actually stomach.
I got a sound clip here that always reminds me. Here's my socialism sound clip.
Got no food. We got no jobs. Our pets' heads are falling off.
I don't know why
this is an accurate representation of Venezuela right now.
Yeah, right. It's the Venezuelan. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll give them credit for the souffle thing, though. I'll give them credit because at least it wasn't another Harry Potter reference or something.
No, it was just straight out of Stalin. Like, oh, we're just gotta crack a few eggs to make an omelet. Like, oh yeah, whatever. People die, you got to make a souffle anyways.
Yeah, no big deal. That's nice.
It's just a statistic at this point. It's okay.
All right, guys. Well, we've had a good run here. This was a good topic. I enjoyed it, and thank you guys a bunch for joining. Going to go ahead and wrap it up. Go to all the websites, right? So there was a big merger, and as a part of it, we got Think Liberty, which is think-liberty.com, beinglibertarian.com, and rationalstandard.com. Make sure to go check all those websites out. There's a bunch of content going up on all of them all the time, and I want to say thanks to the guests for coming on and giving me their time, and thank you, everyone listening, for your time as well, and whether or not anyone likes it, we will probably be back again.